Good afternoon. It is Monday, October 14th, 6 o'clock p.m., and with a quorum of members present, I will be calling the Finance Committee Budget Session Number 2 to order. And we have but just one item on our agenda this evening, on budget discussions and actions regarding recommending a 2025 budget, including setting the 2025 fee schedule. This is a continuation from our discussion on last week. So it looks like we've got, Mary Ann just passed out the budget books, and we've got a presentation queued up. So I don't know, do you want to go right into that, or you got something else?
Anyone else has anything they want to say first? No? Okay. Okay. So at the last meeting, we covered the capital plans for 2025. So now we'll dive into more of the operating budget. So, you know, we always have things that are influencing our budget each year. This has been an expensive year as far as personnel increases. The budget was built with a 15% increase in health insurance. We are still waiting for our final numbers. We're hoping for good news, but initially we had bad news. So 15% is what we have in there. We have a 3% for non-represented employees, about 3.5% for union contracts, and then there were changes to the rates for Wisconsin retirement system. So, you know, almost all the line items as far as personnel changed, except for our self-funded dental, which remained the same. From a non-personnel perspective, each year our contract with Harder's goes up a 2% inflationary increase, so we've included that in the budget. I think I maybe mentioned this. This is the last year, 2025 will be our last year of that 10-year contract. So in 2025, we will have to consider what we're going to do next. Utility costs, we have about a $50,000 increase built in. Motor pool charges, and we'll get into this a little bit later, the departmental budgets. And I'm really now just focused on the general fund. The general fund is where most of the services that we provide residents are allocated to: police, fire, public works. And so we're really talking about the general fund, and that's typically where we focus our attention on the budget, because it's where we see the biggest increases in costs as well. So motor pool charges, so these are the charges to the departments. We have built in there about a $418,000 increase. It should have been more, and we'll kind of discuss that later. The training and travel decreased about $33,000. Now, we have a $229,000 levy increase to debt service. The salt budget in the general fund decreased $100,000 due to ample supply in our salt shed. $35,000 more in rent for the snow dump site. That is really driven by the financial condition of the cemetery. If you recall, we've had several visits by the cemetery in the last maybe year and a half, 2 years, because they are having financial difficulties. And state statutes say that if a cemetery decides that they're no longer financially viable, the city has to take over all of the operations for the cemetery. Yeah. So years ago, when they came to us and said they were having financial difficulties, we had been using a portion of their site for a snow dump site, but we weren't paying for it. We had it free of service. So we developed a lease where we could rent that from them as a snow dump site. The value to that arrangement is that then becomes a winter maintenance cost, which then is considered eligible for transportation aids. Whereas if we just contribute to the services of a cemetery, that would not be a transportation aid eligible cost. So basically, we've been increasing our rent payment to them to help them basically stay afloat.
Because for the most part, we don't want to have to assume that cemetery because
No.
that's going to cost us a lot more
Right.
money.
Because right now, the cemetery is using a lot of casual employees, and they are nonprofit. They provide little to no benefits. So we've been trying to work with them. We also have tried to help them if we have a piece of equipment that would be something that they could use rather than selling it at auction, donating it to them. Those are other areas, as well as helping them with some maintenance issues like, I don't know, spreading gravel maybe? I don't know. So trying to help out where we can. And then we saw increase in janitorial and outdoor maintenance of 33,000. So the budget is basically a math function. We accumulate all of our costs, we look at where our revenues are, and then the net is what has to be supported by levy. And when we determine what the tax rate is, it is either looking at the equalized value or the assessed value. When the schools, the county, the technical college look at their tax or their budget and talk about how their taxes are doing and their tax rate is trending, they're looking at equalized value. So the equalized value is established by the Department of Revenue, and it is based on the entire umbrella of that entity, not on individual parcels. And they establish that by looking at sales and comparing it to what the assessor has on those properties, and then establishing a ratio of assessed value to equalized value. So this year, our equalized value is going up 8.86%. So this is supposed to, I guess, replicate fair market value. You can see the year before it even went up. The last couple of years, it's been going up dramatically. And assessed value is determined by the local assessor, though the manufacturing property is determined by the state of Wisconsin. So they have a valuation division that goes in and looks at those manufacturing properties. So the state has not provided us with the assessed value of manufacturing yet, so we're working on an estimate. But you can see that right now, we're estimating that our assessed value is going to go up 26.4% overall compared to last year. And typically during a revaluation, it's difficult to compare tax bills the prior year to the current year because everybody's property increases in value differently. Certain neighborhoods increase in value faster than other neighborhoods. Certain levels of property do. You know, this last year, I think if you talk to our city assessor, he would say the lower valued homes increased at a higher rate than maybe the higher valued homes did. And then you also have your balance between commercial property and residential property. And that is another thing that the assessor would say is that residential property increased at a faster rate or a higher level than our commercial property did. So then you see tax bills shift. So if you have property that, you know, increased higher than average, that average, if that turns out to be the 26.4%, your tax bill is going to probably go up more than someone whose property value didn't increase as much as 26%. So that is kind of the sweet spot as far as being able to compare apples to apples if you did the average. So also a big part of our formula is net new construction, because this is used by the levy limit calculations and the expenditure restraint. So the state of Wisconsin tries to control local government their taxes through a couple of ways. One is through the levy limit, and it basically says that we cannot increase our levy more than net new construction. and the expenditure restraint, which is a voluntary program, but for us, it's a grant of about $1 million a year. So it's a program that we want to continue to participate in. And that one looks at, so levy limit is looking at our levy. So if our expenses grow and our revenues, our other revenues, non-levy revenues grow, we're in good shape because we don't need more levy. So levy limit is easier typically to achieve than the expenditure restraint, because the expenditure restraint looks at expenses. And so it doesn't really care how your revenues are coming in. So, for example, if you have a grant-funded position, you create 3 new positions, but they're all funded by a grant, and you're still going to have problems with your expenditure restraint because it's just looking at expenses. So that has been a struggle, though there are presentation ways that you can accomplish the expenditure restraint because, governmental accounting standards say that if you have grants, you can use a special revenue fund to account for them and put the expense and the revenues in a special revenue fund. So we, do follow accounting practices, but we use them to our advantage when it comes to expenditure restraint. So we'll get more into this, but this is, 2.46%. You can look back historically. I mean, we've done better, we've done worse. It's not horrible, but it's not great. Oh, and I see I have the word 2024 twice. That should be 2025. So when we look at the levy, looking historically, right now, with that 15% increase in health insurance, we are not meeting the expenditure restraint guidelines, so we definitely know that we have work ahead, and we're hoping that the health insurance rates, which should be in this week, will solve a lot of those problems. But our levy is going up $2,016,000, and then we always have to calculate a portion of the levy for the tax increments, and that is actually going to go down by, right now, we're predicting about $254,000. So the net increase in the levy is $1.7 million today in the budget that you're looking at. And just, I guess, another summary of that, looking at the increases over time, the levy in total. And so each year, obviously, like I said before, the general fund is where the majority of our services are provided. So looking at what the levy needs are in each one of the funds and seeing what's driving the need for increase in the tax levy. The general fund, again, is the biggest consumer of the levy, and it has limited revenue sources that grow at a pace that our expenses grow, and so it needs more levy each year. And so, when you compare the city of Wausau to other communities, we are at a disadvantage because we have not used any of the other revenue tools that many communities use. For example, garbage and recycling. Most communities do not have that on the tax bill as part of the levy calculation. It's a special charge. It may be on a person's tax bill, but it's not part of their levy. Stormwater, if we look around the state and we look even in our neighborhood, many communities have a stormwater utility so that all of the leaf pickup, the street sweeping, even the street trees are part of that stormwater utility, and a separate charge for those, the residents, the nonprofits, and the commercial properties. We have stormwater in our levy. Wheel tax. Wheel tax has become a very popular revenue source. Most communities are using that to help offset rising costs of street maintenance. We do not have that. So we have a very minimal revenue source today. Really, our biggest revenue source well, I'm getting ahead of myself. So we'll just look at these levies. 1.3 for the general fund, and then the recycling fund, 76,000. The community development fund, 11,000. Central purchasing, if you recall, we talked about this at the last meeting, and really it is our investment in technology, and particularly the police department, that caused that increase this year. Capital projects fund, we barely increased the levy, and I guess the downside of not increasing our levy is as our capital needs go up, we rely more and more on debt issuance, which then puts pressure on the debt levy in future years. Metro ride, 198,000. The debt service fund, 230. Parking actually went down 60,000. Airport went up 72. Animal control down 14 to come up with that net levy and the increment, so 1.7 million. But the general fund is the main driver for our increased need for the levy. So we've talked about that increment, and it is a state prescribed formula. Oh, gosh, there I go, I didn't change my date again. So the one on the left is the 33,018 is the 2025. And that's what you get for copy and pasting. So that's the levy, and then you divide it by the equalized value to come up with the interim tax rate, and then you look at what our increment value is for all of our TID districts, and that becomes your levy. And you can see that the increment, the growth in our TIDs went down. Well, why is that? Again, commercial property, we said, didn't go up as much as residential, and in some places, took a hit. And we have that shift of personal property. As of January 1 of 2024, there was no personal property anymore. So obviously, our commercial areas, personal property tax was just on businesses, and it was on their tools and equipment and furnishings that they used to run their business. And it was very unliked tax. It was difficult for businesses because it was time consuming. A lot of businesses paid accountants to do their PP returns for them, and they had to submit them to our assessor's office, and they lobbied against the PP tax, and finally the state has been exempting certain sections of property. First they exempted computers, then they exempted manufacturing equipment, but now they have eliminated it altogether. But that impacted our values because those were built into the values, and now they're missing. So that's another reason why our increment went down. So when we look at the assessed tax rate, again, with that revaluation, you can see that, and now 23, because it's always looking at the value of the property in the year that you release the tax bills. So we are now looking at property valued as of 1/1/2024. So it's the 2024 tax. So the tax bills, if we left everything exactly the way they were, and if my assessed tax value is correct, because I'm using an estimate, because I don't have the state's manufacturing yet, our assessed tax rate would be $9 compared to $10.86 last year. And again, that's because we got so much growth when we revised all of the property values, the individual property values. So again, that's based on an estimate. And then if we compare ourselves to the schools, the county, and tech, because they're always talking about their equalized tax rate, our 2024 equalized tax rate will be $8.72. Now this is, again, if the levy stays where it is in this report, would be $8.72 compared to $9.06, or a decrease of 34 cents, or 3.7%. Obviously, when we're talking about our budget, using accurate numbers and being conservative in certain areas is important because we always want to retain our reserves, sufficient reserves. Our reserves are looked at by Moody's to develop whether we have the financial strength to maintain downturns or unexpected issues, financial struggles. But it has been growing, and as you know, you made the decision in 2024 to transfer $1 million of that reserve out of the general fund to the water utility to help them replace meters. So again, kind of looking at our general fund revenues and seeing that really we don't have a lot of revenue opportunities in the general fund. You can see that property taxes make up about 52% of the budget to help us fund police, fire, public works, general government, parks. And then when we look at our others, we do have our intergovernmental grants, which would include all of our shared revenues from the state, like I said, shared revenues, expenditure restraint, any of the grants that we're getting for police services or fire services, and as well as when the state eliminated the PP tax, they then started giving us a new grant to offset that lost revenue. So we did see some growth in our intergovernmental grants. But you can see that the other areas really have limited capacity to bring additional dollars. Our public charges for services are like police, when they provide police services to another entity. Fire is our largest public charge for services for EMS. But those, and parks, those are our major ones. I will point out that our other financing sources, that 4.77, those are our payments from other funds. As you know, we had a meeting about the water utility payment lieu of tax, which is currently at $1,590,000. Sewer makes a transfer of $485,000, as well as we get a transfer from room tax of just under $147,000. So, you know, that is something on your agenda to talk about. And reduction in any of those makes it harder for us to meet our levy limit. So just kind of a reiteration of that pie chart as far as our grants, and you can see that here it's clear that our intergovernmental grants and aids went up about $690,000, which is the main component of that is that additional PP. And then, you know, as we're settling into workday, I can't wait till I don't have to say those words anymore. We do have some classification changes between our public charges and our intergovernmental charges. And so you can see that they're kind of generally washing each other out, but that's where you'll see the fire revenues going up. I think we had those at about $100,000 increase this year. I'll look at that. Why haven't I known that? Yes, 100,000 for EMS services. And then the state aids stayed relatively stable, except for that PP tax, which shows up on the next page, or the next slide, kind of going over the, yeah. The PP, so the general fund, we received $642,000, and then all of the TID districts received in total $956,000 to offset that loss of revenues. So when we look at the levy limit calculation, it basically said, okay, net new construction at 2.46, you can increase your levy $693,000. We do get a little kicker for TID that we eliminated a few years ago, $3,378. But then because now we don't tax for personal property, it said, oh, you have to decrease your levy by 751,000. So the net of these is really to meet the levy limit. We were supposed to cut our levy by $54,000. So that was happy news because we needed 1.3 million more just in the general fund. So this is part of the struggles that we have. So the state does have a provision that says, and they basically by law must keep that provision available because when we borrow money, it's a general obligation debt. And general obligation debt, a bondholder of our borrowing has an understanding, and we commit to that bondholder that we will levy for debt service to the level that is required to make our debt payments. So basically, we can never default on our borrowing. And so the state, when they introduced levy limit law, I don't know how long ago, this was a caveat that we can increase our levy to meet our debt requirements. And you only increase it by the amount that you need to. So you can see that going back in 2020, we utilized 1.5 million of that debt allowance, I'll call it. And last year we used 2.8. But this year, if we would pass this budget in its current form, we would have to use 4.6. Our maximum is that 11.6 that we have up there. So we're using less than half of that capacity. But it's, something that we need to keep an eye on. Expenditure restraint, as I said, it looks at the general fund's expenses and the levies of all the other funds. And its calculation is we get 60% of net new construction, so that came to 1.47%, and CPI rounded to the nearest 10th percent. So 4.7 is allowable. Under expenditure restraint, we still need to cut the budget. Our current calculation in this formula is 5.76, so we still need $680,000 of adjustments. I believe that when we get our final numbers for health insurance, that will take us more than half the way there. And what does the future hold? I know we've talked about this a lot. We have a lot of grant-funded FTEs today that are going to become a levy issue in the future. So we have one police community outreach specialist that will become on the levy 1/1 of 2027. We have 3 firefighters on ARPA, which if you approve that or if council approves that would become on the levy 1/1/27. The 9 firefighter paramedics would go on the levy January of 26, but we understand now that we think that we can be successful in applying for an extension that will get us through 2025 and put us at the same timing as these 2026 other grants. We have 1 FTE of community care paramedic that is funded through ARPA and private contributions, and 2 police officers who are funded by private contributions. So if we roll all of those up, and I didn't include on here, we have VOCA grant police officers and we have Beat Patrol police officers. Those are, it's like a 50-50 kind of grant now, I would guess. But just these, if we had to move them to the levy today, we would need another $1.6 million. So we have some big dark clouds coming up. And that's why we've talked about taking this to referendum. We thought we were going to maybe have to take it to referendum this fall, but with Jeremy's feeling that he can get his extension on safer, then it would become something to consider in a future year. So when we look at the departments and the increases needed, so our expenses right now, which have the 15% for health insurance, are going up $2.5 million. So when we look at those increases, you can see police and fire are driving those expenses, and some of that is related to those motor pool costs. If you recall, I said that motor pool expenses went up about $500,000 in the 25 budget compared to the 24 budget, and that is driving some of their cost increases, as well as just the general operations. But otherwise, I think, we look at the expenses and they seem pretty reasonable. Just a breakdown, I guess, of the expenses. You can see that the departments providing services to the residents are our biggest expense areas, 12% for general government, and then the rest of our general fund budget is providing services to our constituents, and general government is supporting those efforts. We look at where, if we break down our general fund budget by categories, you can see 71% of our general fund budget is personnel. Because we're a service organization, personnel is going to be the largest component of our budget. Contractual services is the next largest component at $10 million. And I've got kind of a breakdown of what that looks like too. Building materials, that's where sand, salt, those kinds of asphalt that we use for patching, those would be the biggest components of that. Our fixed charges would be not our health insurance, our other types of insurance like casualty, property, liability, those kinds of things. So, and then supplies and expenses. So when we look at contractual services, you can see that here motor pool is the largest category at $4 million. The next largest is technology at 1.6 million, and refuse collection at 1.1, and utilities at 1.1. And those are our biggest categories. And again, we're going to kind of circle back to that motor pool. And then as far as a breakdown of the employees, it pretty much follows where the expenses are, obviously, since it's a large component of that budget. And then when we do balance our budget, we do assume that 3 positions within the organization will remain vacant through the year. Not saying that we select 3 positions and keep them vacant, but with turnover throughout the year, we assume that equates to about 3 positions. So when we're looking at how much we're going to levy, we look at that number and subtract $300,000, which is about equal to 3 positions with benefits. So that helps us maintain and not generate a big profit at the end of the year. So moving on to the special revenue funds, we have just a couple of special revenue funds that rely on general property tax, community development. Our community development funds do, and that really is the economic development director, the planning division, and the community development director position. And a portion of their salaries, planning is 100% levy. Economic development and community development director, a portion of their salaries are paid by other revenue sources, particularly either the community development director is paid 5% by the CDA, and then both the director and the economic development director are paid for out of the TIDS based on their efforts on supporting those districts. The recycling fund is our curbside recycling every other week to residents. It is the yard waste site, and it is leaf pickup. And so we get $148,000 annually. 147 of that is a recycling grant. The rest of it is what we charge at the yard waste site for like commercial people wanting to use it for yard clippings and things. But the rest of it we have to levy for, that's 780, and animal control is the other one, a $45,000 property tax levy. But all the rest of them are funded from other things. The 31,000 that's sitting in the Economic Development Fund, 30 of that is related to universities' 2025 payment, the environmental cleanup. Just to point out that we do get a reimbursement from Wausau Chemical and another Marathon Electric,
Marathon
which now
Electric,
has
yeah.
a new name, but for their share of our super fund efforts that we have that are directed by the EPA. So that's what that $91,000 revenue is. This is something that we had funds set aside from insurance settlement, and we have been slowly chipping away at that. And at some point, that will move to be levy funded annually. Room tax legislation, even though we collect over $1 million of room tax, we can only use 444,000 of that for our general purposes, and if you go to the next slide, we do contribute, this is where our share goes. So we have, years ago, kind of a formula for, I would say, nonprofits that have invested in brick and mortar in the city. And then we transfer 146,000 to the general fund and 89,000 to the 400 blocks / River Life Fund to help offset maintenance and future capital replacements. So like we had some things that we had to do on the 400 block this year to put bollards in. Those came out of that 400 block fund.
Yeah, and I think that transfer to general fund, that's supposed to help cover what our costs for like public works
Yes.
and that for closing roads and
Right.
trash pickup, et cetera.
Yes.
So,
General obligation debt, at the end of this year, the city, so when the city borrows money for our general city purposes, we issue general obligation debt. The amount outstanding at the end of the year, at the end of 2024, will be $69,319,000. And this is kind of a breakdown of, because we have the TID districts paying their share of the debt when we borrow money for their projects, but 69 million. And then if we look at you go to the next slide, based on our 2025 budget, we would be borrowing another 16 million in 2025 and paying off 9 million. So we would see a $6 to $7 million increase in our outstanding debt at the end of the year in 2025. Now, I want to premise this as this does not have any of the lead service line replacement projects in there. And why doesn't it? Because we are trying to settle with the state of Wisconsin on our 2024 project, and this is new territory for the state, and we have been trying to close on that loan for the year, and we have not been able to do that, so we are not quite sure what our obligation will be on that, and it does not include in this plan what we were contemplating for the 2025 lead service line replacement. So that is in addition to anything that is in this plan. And when we talk about our debt limit, the state of Wisconsin says we can borrow up to 5% of our equalized value. And so when we look at how much of that, that allowable amount we have issued, when we look historically at the last few years, you can see it has been declining over time, which is a function of the amount of debt we have outstanding, but it also is a function of property values, because it's 5% of our equalized value. So the last 3 years, when property values have been increasing significantly, that has increased our debt margin. And then if we look at the 2025 budget, again, principal would be the 9.6 million, interest of 2 million to bring the total expenses up to 11,697,000, which is what then is our allowance, I guess, in the levy limit. And then the revenues are coming from the tax increment districts to come up with a net tax of 4.6 million. So we covered capital at the last meeting, so we'll jump into the internal service funds. Internal service funds in governmental accounting are activities that you're doing to service your internal departments. So we have 3 categories of those. Our insurance fund, which is basically managing our premiums with CIVMIC and our self-funded workers' comp plan. So there we have a budget of expenses of $1,017,000, and we have about 1.2 million in reserves. And so this doesn't require a levy because we bill the departments for their share of the insurance, and that's how this fund is financed. The same with employee benefits. We have a budget of 7.8 million, and that is funding our self-insured dental, health, life, the HRA, and wellness. So that budget is 7.8. We have about 1.4 of reserves. Those reserves were really important to us when we were self-insured for health insurance. We are no longer self-insured, so it's less important. And then motor pool. So motor pool is all of the operating expenses for the fleet. That includes the mechanics, outsourcing, any maintenance, all of the parts, gasoline and fuel, and anything else they need to make them run. And that is the motor pool. So, and their capital. So their proposed budget was $9.1 million. So to dive into the motor pool on the next, and we look at their operating budget. So if we look at how the motor pool runs, they have those operating expenses. Like I said, that's the mechanic's time, when we send things out to be fixed, when we buy parts, fuel, all of those expenses. And then we charge the departments, and we charge the departments either on a per mile or per hour rate. So when we had, let's say, a lot of winter activity, the departments would get charged heavier than if we don't have a lot of winter activity. So when we look at 2022, for example, the operating expenses, this is the actuals, the operating expenses were 1.7 million. We billed the departments 3.7. The difference between those two is $2 million. That is the cash, basically, that we generated in that fund to buy the capital. And our capital purchases that year were low, $554,000. One of the things that we experienced after COVID was delay of purchases because everybody was backlogged. So then we look at 23's actual. Our actual operating expenses were 2.9 million. Our revenues that we billed the departments were 4.8 million. And we did a rate adjustment in 2023 and billed the departments a higher level than we did the prior year. And we also billed them separately for fuel because we were having a good year in 2023, and we know, and we've covered this in the past, that we are short on revenue for the motor pool to replace our capital. So We billed the departments 4.8 million, but that math only gave us 1.8 million to buy new equipment with. And we spent 1.9 million. Cash went out the door, 1.9 million in '23. But we also had equipment on order that we hadn't paid for yet. When we did the 2024 budget, we discussed this during the budget time, that this predicament that we find ourselves in. And so operating expenses went up to 3.3 million. Our revenues for the budget were 6.7, but we knew we would not generate all of that for the departments, and yet they needed the funds to replace equipment. So we borrowed 1.6 to supplement our revenue sources for the 2024 bar. So we borrowed 1.6, so that's part of that 6.7. So now we had 3.4 of capital, for money for capital available, and their budget was 3.4. So the 25 request then came in 3.4 for operating expenses. They said we're gonna charge the departments $6 million. And we'll only have then, still the math is we'll only have about 2.5 million for capital. But now the needs for capital replacement are 5.6 million. So we have nearly a $3 million shortfall for capital purchases in the 2025 budget alone. The other problem that we have with this setup is that if we bill the department $6 million in revenue, we have to increase their budget. But we can't increase their budget because of levy limit. And we would have to then pass that levy on to the taxpayer too. And so it really is just a giant affordability problem. So last year when we borrowed, obviously when we borrow money, we can levy for it because that falls outside the levy limit and it falls outside the expenditure restraint. So more and more communities are borrowing as a solution, but that solution costs money in the future. So you're basically solving problems through debt. Or you can generate other revenue sources. Again, other communities are doing that too, through wheel tax, through stormwater, through garbage. Communities are looking at all sorts of different revenue sources now. And basically they have municipal service charges that get added on to a person's water bill. I know, like, none of this is a great solution. But this is the dilemma that we're in. And so today, you know, when we meet with Motor Pool, we say, okay, you have to cut back on your capital. But the downside of that is the fact that we have capital that then becomes more expensive to maintain because it breaks down and is frustrating to use for the departments.
What's driving this increase in capital purchases? Is it just, you know, with the last 3 years?
Of deferrals.
Of deferrals, the unavailability of equipment, now all of a sudden, we're getting that stuff and,
Yeah, and Solomon is here to help us understand that. And cost increases. I don't know if you have examples or could provide information of like what kind of increases we're seeing, because I know we're seeing big increases.
Right. Excuse me, absolutely. I can pull up some numbers here, but the equipment is astronomical. Just in some of the increases, I think it was about 24 or 26%. Some of the increase has for equipment. We're still trying to follow standards. We didn't have standards that we were following in the past, so we are trying to get on that track. And every time we are spending money on equipment, we get to this point where we don't have enough budgeted, so it gets pushed to the next year. So then this bucket's filling back up, and the more we push, the more we need.
Right.
And so it really comes down to whether, you know, this equipment's aging and it needs to be replaced. So.
So, you know, So right now, we're saying we would generate 4.6 million of revenues from motor pool based on this current budget. And that increased the general fund's expenses by about $500,000. And then the rest of it is funded, when we look at these other budgets and increases like the recycling fund, because the vehicles, all of that heavy equipment is used to do leaf pickup, those costs go up. So you saw, I think, about an $80,000 increase in the levy, in the recycling, in the airport fund. All of those, some of that is generated by an increase in the motor pool costs for that department for 2025. So the general fund isn't the only fund that gets billed. There's water and sewer gets billed a little bit for certain things. I'm not really sure what they're using. You probably know Solomon better than I do, but parking fund gets billed. And then I think the other thing that we did in 2024 is when we looked at our current rate structure, and when we had that Mercury study, they said, really, your rate structure is not sufficient to recover the expenses. And when we looked at what our rate structure was, pickup, based on our billing rates, was getting billed like $30,000 a year for motor pool. Like a department who had one pickup would pay about $30,000 a year, which is a lot to bill for a pickup. But the fire trucks were not paying much at all. And so Solomon went through and recalculated all of our rates, and what we found is that it shifted so that now a pickup isn't going to pay $30,000 for motor pool charges a year. They're going to pay, let's say, $9,000, and that's fuel, insurance, maintenance, and future replacement, because we're supposed to be generating basically extra money to replace the equipment when it needs to be replaced. But that pushed more of the cost onto heavy equipment, fire trucks, the big street trucks, and on police vehicles, because the police vehicles get turned over quicker, and they have all of these, all of their computer equipment is paid for by the fleet services. So they now have a higher percentage of the motor pool budget. But it's based on actual historic information, those new rates.
Is there any other questions on this? I'm not sure if I saw hands or not. Alder Tierney?
Mary Ann, when you were talking about like recycling, the leaf pickup, all that good stuff, why do we do two? Why don't we just do one leaf pickup?
That is under proposal right now.
Because it seems like, that early leaf pickup, people are saying, nothing's even dropped yet. And my thought is, okay, you start that leaf pickup a little bit later and it ends a little bit earlier, but, you're saving costs by only doing one. And, these are things that I think of where you could save money and the impact isn't going to be huge.
Right. Eric could probably speak to that.
Yeah, a few years back, just to give you a little history, probably about 6-7 years ago, it was determined, to go ahead and do it twice, right? So we'd have the vac trucks that would go out and people could just put it on the boulevard or next to the curb and we'd pick them up. Obviously, the weather, it's all dependent on the weather. So, but part of that reason too, that we were looking at kind of increasing that amount was because of the potential for us to get stormwater credit, right, for nutrient removal and phosphorus in particular. Those rules haven't come out yet, but it looks like now that those rules, they might not come out for another year or two, but the draft rules that everybody's looking at, I don't think that we're going to get any credits. I mean, we'd have to pick up like 6 times. We'd have to pick up in all of the alleys. We couldn't have people put them on the street. So, and the reality is that, leaf pickup for us, whether we, just get rid of the first pickup, get rid of all of it, right? And just improve the yardway site and have everybody come in and drop their own leaves off, right? That's another option as well, right? And we wouldn't realize all of those costs, because we still have to sweep and we still have to do those things. But as you've seen, it's a large expense for us. And so those are all options, that are available, for that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, what makes common sense? And, everybody is, the first pickup was scheduled to start, and people are like, why is it starting already? So
Right.
that's why, in my mind, I thought, well, if you delay that first start by a couple of weeks, you're still going to be done theoretically before the snow flies, and that should reduce a pretty good cost, I would think, on that, because it is expensive.
Yeah, and that, in that first pickup, we're not out unless the leaves are there, right? So I don't know how much we'd really realize on that, right? I mean, we have staff that are around the city looking where people will call in, but, if there's not a lot of leaves that have come down like now, the back trucks, they really aren't out, going. So, yeah.
It's tough. I know 2 years ago, our street was towards the end of the cycle, and we had that heavy snowstorm right after
Yep.
Halloween, and that just buried the leaves, and that
Yep.
totally compounded the problem.
Right.
So it's this fine line of waiting for the leaves to fall, hoping you don't get caught in a snowstorm, and it's just a terrible balancing act. But yeah, I understand. I know where you're coming from, because we changed the schedule a few years ago to try to be more responsive to people's needs. They wanted to see more leaf pickup, but maybe that's, if we're not going to get those storm credits, maybe that's not something that we need to do, and encourage more mulching and other types of leaf disposal.
Right, and you want to be able to do things for the city, but at the same time, the debt is going up and up and up, and you have to look at, okay, what can we cut sensibly? That's not going to be horrible. And if we're losing the credits that we're getting, to cut back on something like this, in my mind, would be maybe one of those smart options to look at. As Mary Ann said, that's something being considered now anyways.
I think the other thing, so we've talked about, well, what are some solutions here? A number of years ago, we did, at the end of the year, look and say, oh, we've, made a profit in the general fund, and we transferred $1 million into the motor pool to try to help get us caught up on capital. That was a one-time transfer. When we were looking at the 2023 financial results, in the back of my mind, I thought that might be an option for us, but then the water meters came up, and, when we looked at that need, we felt that that was a more important priority to propose. The other thing that we've talked about, and, I know we've done some discussion at that here at committee, is, if we have projects that come under budget in ARPA, or for whatever reason don't fulfill all of their expenses by the end of that 2026 period, we would have to give those funds back. So we had talked about, well, could you make some commitments? And, I have all the departments working on their allocations right now to kind of predict where they're going to be on their final costs. But, that would be something that we could say, I think Solomon has about $700,000 of purchase orders that he went through the proper bidding process. He just hasn't issued the POs yet. And could those be funded by ARPA as a way to help us balance the operating budget of motor pool? So when we look at 2024 year end, if we had a profit, we could transfer that to the motor pool fund. We could supplement with some ARPA dollars. But there aren't, without either generating the money through the levy, or borrowing, or adopting a wheel tax, there really are not a lot of options out there.
So, Mary Ann, I got a question. If we're looking at 2025 budget proposed of 2.3 million in capital purchases versus a need of 5.6 million, are we just deferring
Yes.
equipment, a rolling stock? So like adding an extra year to a squad or an extra 2 years to a dump truck kind of thing? Okay.
Mary Ann, my question is, are we, since this is proposed budget, are all these departments still looking at ways to try to trim things down a little bit as well? Because I know we had talked about,
Yes.
and Doug had talked about, if it's not critical, it may have to be on the wayside a little bit. So I'm just wondering if we have been able to trim some of this throughout the budgeting process.
You will get a chance at some of those that are going to be shown to you on a menu format, whether they're cuts or whether they're revenue enhancers. But as we talked about early on, we're 600,000 over as it is. So we're not there yet. We're dead in the water right now. We can't, unless we forego the expenditure restraint, and that impact is like $1 million.
Yeah.
So we could go 600 over, we'd lose $1 million. So we've got a long way to go yet. The part where we're shooting in the dark on, we don't know what our medical, our health insurance is going to be. We'll know that any day now. If it comes down from the 15% assumed to single digits, things will be a lot easier. But yes, we're just getting started. You're going to have plenty of opportunity to take a stab at it. Gary, I think, had a question over here.
Yeah, go ahead, Gary.
Well, I really don't.
I don't want to put you on the spot, but, okay.
And I think one of the items that's in this replacement is a new aerial. So an aerial is a 1.4 million dollar item. And so that, that's part of that bump.
And I
We
think
don't replace the aerial every year.
our aerial is, what was it replaced in '07? I think it's at least 15,
I don't know.
20, I know it, yeah, so.
It's a 2012,
Two-
and there's
okay.
a 10-year standard on it where it has to be cycled into retire, or second line after 10 years, and the standard is after 15 years it needs to go away, and we're talking 2 or 3 year out order times. So that's why we're trying, the last 2 years, the aerial's been on the replacement plan, so we would get it by that 15-year mark, and we've had to push it the last 2 years, so that's where that bucket keeps filling up with all the rollovers.
Okay, thank you.
Brian, I'm sorry to interrupt. I didn't have anything to add on this, but Chief Kopp was unable to be here this evening. It sounds like he was trying to get in, but a meeting invite had been sent to him, and he was still waiting to get in. I just wanted to share that in case you needed to hear from the fire chief on anything as well. He's standing by to contribute.
Sorry. Do we have any questions for him? I forgot about that. Did you? Oh, your seat is-
I guess I have a question about the lead pipes. Where is that coming? I mean, we didn't pay our money this year. Weren't we supposed to pay 2.3 million?
Yeah.
Okay, so do we have that in reserve that we know where that's coming from? Or is that,
So we must borrow. So there was a component, I don't have my notes with me and my brain is fried. You know it, Eric.
2.4.
2.4.
Yeah, it was right around 2.3 million.
Okay, that's what
Yeah,
I thought, yeah.
for the loan portion.
But then
Yeah.
there's a forgiveness. But if you don't take out the loan, they won't give you the grant.
Correct.
So we have to borrow the
right,
money.
do we know where that's coming from? Because I thought that's 2024, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, so we are trying to rattle cages to get them to tell us, like, what's that amortization schedule going to look like so that we can include it in the budget. But right now, we don't have that. And we've, we haven't drawn any of those funds either. So like
Right.
right now, we don't have an obligation.
Right.
So there's no interest accruing at this point.
Right. I think we've been doing this for months and months with the DNR, right? We expected to close back in May and June, and here we are, right? So, we're not the only community in this. And we haven't also received what they, are going to allocate for us for next year.
Okay.
And that was supposed to be in September, so we're still waiting on that. But we're definitely gonna have the allocations before we actually close on the loan for this year. You
Okay.
know, so that'll all probably come at once, but yeah, so.
Will we have do you think we'll have the idea before the budget gets,
For next year?
Yeah, for like before November?
Yeah, I'm really hoping, but,
It's a
I've been
month away.
hoping for months. Yeah, so, yeah.
But we were supposed to know pretty much the plan for 2025 now anyways, right? Because
Yeah.
what is the city being committed to?
Right. Right now, the preliminary numbers were about 9.3 in principal forgiveness and 5.2 or 4 for loan.
For a loan? So
Yep.
5 million
Plus
Yep.
2.3.
Plus the 24, which is about
plus
2.3. Yeah.
plus that, I thought that was real, but that's an addition then?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how much does an individual leaf pickup cost? I mean, a lot of staffing involved, which we are paying for anyways, so what
Yep.
is the difference between one leaf, so how much are we, if we just say one leaf pickup, how much are we really saving?
Well, I think at 23, aren't we like right around 400,000, Dustin? Yeah. So,
Per leaf pickup?
Yeah,
Or
leaf
what-
collection
what
was
goes into
real
that?
close to 400,000.
And what's that?
So we have 2 leaf vac trucks that run around the city, and then we also rent a tractor and a baler, and then we use a couple of front end loaders, a small one and a larger one for pushing the leaves into windrows and then picking up the bales, loading them in trucks and stuff like that.
But-
So to go down to one leaf collection, if we're just trying to condense, I guess the question becomes like, I don't know that I can really use less equipment because all I'm doing is trying to condense it into 2 weeks. So we're still going to need all of that equipment to try and, if we're going to do the leaf collection, we're just going to condense it into a smaller window. Like when we're leaf vacuuming right now, we can spread it out. And like on a day like today, it's not raining, we're not going out there. If we get to a point where we're trying to do everything, the whole city in 2 weeks, we're going to have to try and cram everything in. And we're not going to have the luxury of doing a little at a time. We're going to have to be out there with everything. So I don't know that I can see a big savings to just condensing to one. Now, if we're willing to, change our service level where we don't have to pick them up, I don't know how that's going to go as far as getting approval for that. But, that is the hard
So-
part because if I'm going to pick up leaves, however many leaves come down, our goal is to pick them all up. If we can get more people involved with the mulching, stuff like that, where we don't have to, but it
But
becomes
it's
hard.
equipment that we own though, right? It's,
Not, the tractor and baler we rent, everything else we own.
so the actual expense as part of that
If we-
400,000?
Yes, the rental is all part of that.
Okay, anything else as part, so that's pretty much what that is?
Yeah, so the yardway site, so like if we did away with leaf collection, we could reduce a lot of that. Like if we just didn't do it, you could cut that 400,000, but now we're gonna probably drastically increase
Right.
our yardway site costs because we're gonna have to have a lot more maintenance pushing up. During leaf season, that's a daily thing where we gotta push it up and haul leaves away. If everyone is bringing those leaves down, right now, our current setup is the bales, we don't pay for trucking, so the person that's buying the bales provides the trucks. If we're hauling from the yardway site, now I'm gonna have to pay for trucking to haul them all to the recyclers.
But if we condense that leaf pickup down to one pickup, that would be several weeks that we wouldn't be renting, that we currently do for that truck and that baler.
The balers we only rent during phase 2. So phase 1, the only thing we have is just the leaf vacs that are out running. We could look at, if we could, to do it in 2 weeks, I don't know because right now we have, I think it's, what is it? The different sections of the city to try and squeeze that, we could maybe come down 1 week, but we would have to renegotiate and see, how much that's going to bring down the cost of the baler, because he's kind of doing it based on, he knows about what our usage is and how many bales we're going to put through the machine and stuff.
And I think that's part of trying to cut costs is renegotiating where we can and seeing, is this worth it or is it not?
Yeah.
That baler is a significant expense. I remember the lease on that is not,
It's close to 50,000.
yeah, per year. If you didn't use the baler and just ran leaf trucks, would there be a savings? Or would that be just too much for those leaf trucks to
I
handle?
don't think we could keep up with just the 2 leaf trucks. I don't think we'd be able to move enough leaves fast enough to keep up with it.
Okay. I don't know, do we got the fire chief on? Is he?
Yeah, he's on.
Okay.
Can you hear us, Jeremy? Can you speak?
Good morning. How are you guys?
Hey.
Oh, there we go. Good evening. And thanks for joining us, Chief Cop. And I think there was some question about the motor pool budget and in regards to the aerial truck. There's, because that's one of the significant expenses in the budget, in the motor pool budget for this year. So,
Yes, and I was watching you guys on YouTube, and right now, Solomon spoke to it. It's a 2 to 3 year process if you're going to spec a new truck, and that was coming to the end of its life at that point already. The only thing I would correct is the prices on vehicles keep going up every year, and right now, our neighbors at 2 of our different fire departments in our immediate area bought new ladder trucks, and they're right around $2 million.
okay.
I think the other thing too, we did talk about EMS billing. So for a couple years now, and in with your packet was a legal size document of some of the savings that some of the departments or new revenue sources that they were contemplating. And Jeremy had added to his list that right now, the state of Wisconsin does not get the Medicare, Medicaid reimbursement levels that some states get. I don't know, I can't explain the details. Can you explain the details, Jeremy?
Yes, so it's called GEMT, and
Yeah.
Illinois is their closest one to us that's been doing it for about 3 years now, and it was gonna kick in Wisconsin via legislation in January, and they got some language wrong, and it ended up going awry over in I think it was New York, New Jersey area, so they went back to legislation, and now it's in the state's hands, but once it does get approved and the new language comes out and we copy, just like GMT is doing in Illinois, what we're gonna find is we're gonna create a lot more revenue, more so in Wausau than a lot of communities, because we have so many patients that fall under Medicare, Medicaid. And we're anticipating quite a large jump in revenue based on that law once it comes into play. The nice part about that law is they say once it does come into play, we'll be able to backdate it all the way back to a year and a half ago. So we're looking at quite a bit of revenue there, but again, I can't guarantee any numbers, but I would venture to guess based off a department that's close to our size in Illinois that we're looking at $900,000 or more.
But not knowing when that would happen, we couldn't include it in the 25 budget, but it certainly is going to be something that, if it is available in 26, could be really helpful to us. And
Yeah, the conference I'm at right now, we're hoping to learn more this week about it with the other chiefs. And I think at the next budget session, hopefully Wednesday night, I'll have a little bit more information, but I'm very hopeful that that gets pushed through legislation by the end of this year. But again, I can't make any guarantees.
All right. Anything else? Anything else on the motor pool? Otherwise, we should probably keep moving.
Yep. So that, we're almost done. So then, Metro Ride, this is kind of a hard budget to pinpoint to. So we've got $4.5 million worth of expenses. we have a levy of 1.1 million. What makes budgeting for transit hard is the state, so a big portion of the motor pool's budget is federal and state operating grants. The state doesn't even close its grant period until mid-December. So they have forms that each transit in the state fills out, submits them to the DOT. They go through a process, and then this year, for the '24 allocation, we didn't receive our allocation award notice until, I think it was June, the very end of June. So we never really know what our federal and state grants are going to be. So when Aaron and I worked on the budget this year, we assumed the grants that we received for last year, but that can change. But we do have a reserve for Metro Ride that we would call upon if we didn't meet those requirements. Obviously, this levy could go down. Also, if we have a decrease in health insurance, because, you know, they have 30-some employees in transit, so there'll be an impact to that too. But really not any significant changes to the budget outside of just the general cost to continue. The other thing with Metro Ride, when we submit that grant to the state, obviously we want to make sure that we have sufficient contingencies in there if fuel prices go up, because if we don't include it and they go up, the formulas for the grant are typically a percentage of your expenses up to a certain point. So the state used to dictate actually what you could use as your fuel rate. They don't do that anymore. But, so we try to put a little bit of a contingency for fuel and for parts replacements, similar to what Motor Pool does. You know, they have a slight contingency for those types of items as well. Oh, yeah, the airport is another enterprise fund. Its expense increased by 79,000. The levy is 332,000. Last year's levy was 260,000. Again, additional costs for Motor Pool and for the contract that we have with Wausau Flying Service, and a slight decrease in revenues. In the parking fund, here we're able to actually decrease the levy a little bit. You know, we tore down the McClellan ramp this year, and so we don't have all of the maintenance costs associated with that, the lighting, the DPW staff, the insurance, all of those things added up. So we were able to decrease the levy, as well as our parking permits revenue is starting to go up. So what do we have left? As I said, we're still waiting for that assessed valuation from the state. We want to go through the budget proposals, changes, and then to really determine what our total tax bill is going to look like, we need to get the apportionments from the school, the county, and the technical college, and our lottery credit and school credit. Those don't typically come until November. So from a procedural standpoint, I know Randy is going to be out on Thursday, so if you had any questions on community development, not a lot of activity there. He's available tonight, but we could have departments available next Thursday.
Wednesday.
Or Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Yeah, sorry, my bad.
Yeah.
Wednesday. And go over some of these proposed changes to the budget and kind of see, and we should have, I would imagine that we'll have health insurance by Wednesday, and we can put that into our software and calculate what the impact to the levy was. So we'll have a better idea where we are.
Okay. So
And
really,
anything else, you know, like if people have any assignments that they'd like to learn more about, you know, just let us know.
Okay.
Can get that together in the next.
So we're really not going to, we're not going to dig into like cuts or anything tonight, but,
I wasn't thinking.
Yeah.
We would,
which is probably good, gives us a little bit of time to digest this. Does anybody have any questions for Mary Ann or any department heads that are here this evening?
and I can put the budget on next Tuesday's agenda too, so that if we have any additional discussion, we want to talk about the budget for our regular finance.
For our regular finance
Yeah.
meeting?
I'll put it on
Okay,
there too.
yeah, just as a,
Question.
oh,
When
go
you're
ahead.
free, when you're free.
No, go ahead.
Well, that one slide, quite a ways ago, back, with regard to our commitments, especially from
Oh, yeah.
ARPA, the fire department, and I think the bottom line for 2025 was 1 million plus, I
Six.
think.
Yeah, 1.6.
Do we have to, look at those? Because I see, for instance, in the fire department, personnel from estimated actual 7.8 million to now 9.7 million. Maybe we should look at, what kind of attrition's going to be happening next year anyways and I know that we have to build in those ARPA. I know I know we have to deal with that. We made that pledges and I know that. But, I'm just sort of looking at some of these budgets and saying, is there some other, through attrition or some other scenario that we can come up with regard to, saving money here and there? That 1
Yes,
million
six.
sort of,
Yeah, that's a lot.
it's a
Well-
lot of money and,
So Jeremy, you have how many vacant positions right now?
Oh, unfortunately, I just got another resignation this morning. And the ones that were on the queue aren't necessarily starting yet. So I'd say by the end of the year, if we're not able to start anybody else, we're gonna be 10 or 11 short. Which is obviously causing some overtime issues, but,
I would
we're
say.
getting there.
Yeah.
I got high hopes with some of our new recruitment tools and some of the partnerships with NTC. I think I told you guys about them in the last update, but I'm really hoping that we start an apprenticeship program with NTC, and if we get the congressional spending from Senator Baldwin's office, then we're going to be looking at a whole other realm of a way to recruit. The retention is not so much a problem as it is the fact that people are just retiring other than, we got another resignation this morning, but I got high hopes, and I really believe we can cut these numbers down as long as some things fall in place. It's just so many different irons in the fire right now of what way we're going to go, whether it's the congressional spending, whether it's an apprenticeship program in partnership with NTC and the state of Wisconsin technical program. But we have a few things going, but we just need to get there, and it's a struggle, for us, and the fact that we're that many short right now.
Alder Tierney?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, Jeremy, is the increase in the fire budget, is that with the expectation of hiring those more employees that, because you're about 10, 11 down, is that budgeted for having more employees on board and that's why there's a couple $1 million difference?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that increased budget has to do with the 3 new firefighters and the anticipation of the 9 that'll come off the SAFER grant at the end of the next 25-6.
So
Am I correct, Mary Ann?
the 24 budget and the 25 budget have the SAFER and the ARPA positions in them. I think what Gary was referring to was the estimated actual, which is showing less expense than your budget. I hate to say this, but I'm not really confident in my estimated actual numbers. We had a lot of challenges with the budget software this year in computing those estimated actuals. And I think it was really hard we could estimate when there was a vacancy. We struggled with the estimation of how does that impact overtime. So I wouldn't spend that money yet. Would be my response to that.
All right. Go ahead.
I actually have a question on a different slide that we had seen previously.
Okay.
And maybe Mayor would be able to answer this for me, is one of the things that kind of caught my eye was when I was looking at the mayor's office, and I saw quite a high percentage hike in that it was a 20.9% increase. Looks like last year it was at 199,000, and this year at 241, and that was a 20.9% increase. And I was looking back in history, it wasn't anywhere near that previously, just asking why.
Sure, I can assure you that it was not a raise, but it would be the health insurance, and quite likely that the previous occupants there did not have insurance through the city.
So this would be picking up insurance for the executive assistant that's. in
And the
your
mayor.
office. And the mayor.
And the mayor,
Yeah.
And,
correct.
okay, that
So
would,
especially on the small departments, that can really have a huge impact on their budget.
So if you look at the other items on there, I think we
Yeah.
cut as much as
Yeah.
we could. We cut the National Mayors Association, or whatever the heck that was, for 3,800.
Well, that's just it, I saw all these cuts,
Yeah,
and I'm
we're
like,
trying to limit spending there. But what I will tell you also, did you have another question?
no, I was just, like I said, I thought, okay, well, it's got to somehow be in personnel services, and it just was such a large increase from previous years.
it stuck out to me too.
Questioning.
It stuck
Sure.
out to me too, but no, that, picking up health insurance for the two employees in that department, actually, it makes total sense, so.
So, one piggyback on Mary Ann's comment, we have had some issues with the new software. So traditionally, you would have, the finance committee would have had this packet a week or two ago, and then you'd come into the meeting having seen it prior. So take the time, look at it. If we need to have another meeting in between, I think that would be a good idea, because we do have to massage these numbers. It's probably $1 million over where I was hoping it to be. So here it is, minimum of 600 over, that we're not going to be able to pass under the
Yeah.
expenditure restraint. So it has some work to go.
Yeah, if we need to take the time for a fourth budget session, that's not unprecedented. Some years, we've needed to do that. Other years, it's just been smooth sailing. So just kind of keep that in mind, that if we can't get these issues, get the numbers resolved in the time we've got allotted, we can do another budget
We
session.
also don't want to take it all on the back of fire with Jeremy Cobb's
Oh, absolutely
11
not,
guys.
yeah.
So let's
No.
be careful. I mean, I think it's a good strategy across the board, but we have to be careful that we don't just,
no, I was.
Jeremy's sitting here thinking, hey, I need those 11, or I need half of them.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. We don't want to have to pay overtime if we don't want to, so, go ahead.
Well, no, and I was just piggybacking on Alder Gisselman's question and wanted to know what that did or didn't include, because it's substantial. I think the next time we meet too, we're going to have those insurance
Yes.
figures, which will put things in, okay, this is where we are, instead of I hope or I think.
Right,
Because that's a lot of money.
yes.
Okay, anything else?
One more thing, please?
Yep, go ahead.
I'm going back to our capital project, and since last week, especially, I'm looking at the Cherry Street and the Randolph Street, and I know that those are big, close to $4 million projects. At one point in time, do we start to think that maybe they have to wait a year? Because I'll just keep talking about our streets. I cannot, let me rephrase this, it becomes difficult to, in the light of all the other needs that the city has, parks, I get that, the services that we want to provide for our community, parks and streets, I think, and I think that where I'm sort of going a little bit this evening is these large projects, maybe at some point in time, we just have to start to think that maybe we have to wait. That's a lot of money for that, and at this point in time, can that money maybe partially be used somewhere else? That's a lot of money for public works. The Cherry Street, I know that may involve, I think that involves a large public works construction, so, but I'm just looking at some of the other large public works things that, at this point in time, in the light of everything else, can we wait a year? Thank you.
I don't think we have an answer for that tonight, but that's,
And that would reduce our debt.
yeah, I know you were just speaking rhetorically, so. But that's something, it is something to consider, because I know that Randolph Street project is a significant piece of infrastructure underground that needs to be replaced, and that's what really drives the cost to it. So, okay, anything else? Oh, Alder Kearney.
And Eric, maybe you can help me out on this one. I've seen, looking at some of these budget modifications and with Public Works, I see that there's a lot of, where we're getting bids for asphalt patching. And I was just wondering, we purchased this piece of equipment earlier in the year. Is that being maxed out in its usage, or are we not using it enough? Because I was hoping to see some of that go down with the purchase of that fine piece of equipment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but, the thing is, though, is we're just doing a lot more roads, right? So there's a lot more roads being paved. We've had a lot of good feedback, actually, from the residents, just seeing our staff out there throughout the year and putting blacktop down. So yeah, the equipment's been amazing that you authorized us to do. We're much more efficient, both compaction and actually getting the work done. So it's been fantastic. We did show earlier, I don't exactly know what those numbers are, that us doing it is less than our bid costs. And so it's really just a matter of, those hot mix prices, petroleum prices go down, that usually gets better. And so then we're just able to do more with the money that's authorized, so.
So you think you are seeing a savings with being able to use that?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Anything else? Okay. Not hearing anything. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Alder Tierney?
Thank you.
Second. Henke? All those in favor say aye. Aye. And we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you on Wednesday.
I'm glad we clarified that. I'd be like, oh.